This video will show you how to determine a unit rate from a graph. These are your notes. So everything that we do in the video should be copied down onto your half sheet of notes. So how to determine a unit rate from a graph. So these are your notes. But before we do anything onto your notes, in the left-hand corner, write the word ordered pairs. Ordered pairs. So that should sound familiar because ordered pairs are very important when you're working with graphs. So ordered pairs on a coordinate plane are always written as x comma y. And I know that x and y, they're actual numbers. So the idea of ordered pairs should sound very familiar to you. And we're going to keep coming back to the idea of ordered pairs, x, y. So look where it says helpful form. So helpful form you can think of as a formula or a certain way to write something to help you understand unit rate. So helpful form is going to be y over x. So in other words, y divided by x. I know I need to divide, just like we've been doing the past few weeks, because there's that fraction bar. So again, y over x, y divided by x. So we actually do our long division, it's going to be y divided by x. So these forms should be written down in your helpful form box. So let's look at we do number 1. Before we do anything to try to determine the unit rate from a graph, let's just think of what the graph is telling us. So the title is telling me employee soda consumption. So in other words, let's use Chipotle for an example. The employee soda consumption is how much the employees or the workers at Chipotle drink, in this case, per day. And I know it's day per day because the x-axis is labeled as days, the y-axis is labeled as number of sodas. So number of sodas per day. So now let's try to determine the unit rate from this graph and we do number 1. One thing is helpful, that's helpful to do is look how the x-axis is labeled. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 underneath that red circle. In this case, it's easy to read this graph to determine the unit rate. And again, remember, unit rate is like one of something. What happens in 1 hour? How far do I get in 1 hour? What's the cost of 1 box of cookies? What's the cost of 1 cupcake? And so on. So in this case, we want to know in 1 day, how many sodas do the employees at Chipotle drink? So I'm going to find 1 on my x-axis, which is circled, and I'm going to look up until it meets the graph, until I meet the graph, and then it meets the graph at this point, and then I look over to my y-axis, and it says 40. So just to interpret or figure out what it means, the order pair is 140. So that means in 1 day, the employees at Chipotle, as a group, will drink 40 sodas. So since I have that value of 1, I know that my unit rate, so this should be copied, the unit rate is 40 sodas per day. Per day. So again, look at how the x-axis is labeled. If it's labeled by 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, you can simply just find 1 on the x-axis, look to where it meets the graph, and then look across to the y-axis, and then that will tell you the unit rate. So now let's look at we do number 2, where we have to look at, do a little bit more than just look at this graph. So again, let's first start to understand the graph. I know it's about money, because that's the title. My x-axis is labeled number of weeks. My y-axis is labeled total savings. So this graph is telling me how much I save each week. And then let's try to make sense of some of these points on the line. So I'm going to go ahead and circle them. This point 0, 0 is telling me that in 0 weeks I earn or I save $0. This point here is telling me that in 2 weeks I save $94. In 4 weeks I save $188. 6 weeks I save $282. 8 weeks I save $376, and in 10 weeks I save $470. So this is just us reading what the graph is telling us. So now let's determine the unit rate for the graph and we do number 2. We're going to use this form, y over x, or in other words, y divided by x. So the first thing I want to do is choose any point on this graph. And let's go ahead and choose this point right here. And I know the point is 4, 188. So I'm just going to write it as an ordered pair, 4, 188. This is my x value, this is my y value, because I know in an ordered pair it's x, y. One thing I'm going to encourage you to do is you can choose any other point on this graph. So for example, don't use 0, 0, because that doesn't really tell us information. So you can use any of the other points that are circled in blue other than 0, 0. And then see if you get the same unit rate as me. So, because you can use any point on this line. So now let's divide. I know that it's going to be 188, because that's my y value. Divided by 4, because that's my x value. So again, we're using long division, so let's go ahead and divide. I know that 4 can go into, it can't go into 1, but I know that 4 can go into 18 4 whole times. 4 times 4 is 16. And then I subtract 18 minus 16, I know is 2. Bring down my 8. 28 divided by 4 is 7. 7 times 4 is 28. I subtract, so I get a remainder of 0. So now I know that 47 is my unit rate. So to make it make sense with the graph, my unit rate, so the unit rate, this should be copied. The unit rate is $47 per week. Because I know that if it's 4 weeks and I earn $188, I can simply divide to get my unit rate, so how much I save in 1 week. So these are the 2 different ways that you can determine unit rate from a graph. Next, glue your notes into your notebook. I will tell you what page. And then 2, set up your notebook page, again I'll tell you what page, into 6 sections for your stations. So you can use your ruler, label the sections A through F, and then we can go ahead and start with your stations.